to comparing forms of government, and to a slightly lesser extent, we're also going to be comparing economic systems. This unit will go faster than the last one, I would think. A lot more real world examples here, but at the same time, even though you've looked maybe at the slides and said, hey, that's the same length, you will quickly realize that there is about a third of this in the middle that I'm not actually going to, assess you on. I put it together because I thought it was fun. And if you're interested in it, by all means. But the whole history of government thing I put in there was more just me seeing if I could do that off the top of my head. So, with that said, let's get started on comparing forms of government in Chapter 2. Okay, so the three things we're going to be looking at over this chapter are economic style, so how are goods and wealth created, and then how are those goods and wealth distributed? So how do we get the income or the product, and who decides that sort of thing. Next up is distribution of power. This is the central focus of this chapter, and this boils down to who holds the power, who is in charge, and how do they implement that power. And then lastly is just forms of government, how that power is held. This one is super short. There's only 3 of them, and really we're going over it because in the next chapter you're going to need to be familiar with this. So that one will be pretty quick at the end. As with the last chapter, there's a couple video clips here I'd like to show you that I can't embed in the this video itself. So I will tell you, pause this video, go to the link in Google Classroom, watch the little clip, come on back. I promise you, they're worth it. All right, with that being said, let's go over economic stuff. So economics are a product of what are called the factors of production. Were this a normal year, we would spend a lot more time on this and really kind of work through on the board how exactly this all works together. But I realize it is much harder to keep your concentration when you're watching a video online, even if it is sped up. Pro tip, you can speed stuff up if you think I'm talking too slowly. I doubt many of you think that, but you never know. All right, so factors of production. What goes into creating something? So your first thing is going to be land. What are the natural resources in your nation state? So do you have arable land that you can grow stuff on? Do you have a mineral that nobody else has? So for example, Jamaica has the world's largest and almost only supply of bauxite. What does bauxite do? I don't know, but they're the only ones that have it, which means mining bauxite in Jamaica is a big thing. And if you can control the production of bauxite, you can make a lot of money down there. Do you have access to water? Take a sec, look at a map of Senegal and Gambia on the west coast of Africa. Gambia is literally just a little strip of riverfront property surrounded by the Pac-Man shaped Senegal that has no access to water. Those countries have had to get along because Senegal can't get out, or Senegal can't get to the water, and Gambia can't really get out to trade with the rest of Africa. So they have to sort of work hand in glove there to make that work. And also just terrain. What do you have around you in your nation state that is going to be helpful, that could be problematic? So we think about terrain for America. One of the big things we have going for us is we're surrounded on 2 sides by oceans. It's pretty hard to invade us, made all the harder by the fact that we get along very well with Canada, and Mexico's got so much of its own stuff going on that nobody's going to come up through Mexico despite what the cinematic masterpiece Red Dawn may tell you. So it's not always going to just be, hey, we can use that thing X. It can also be, how can thing X help us out? So, for example, like I said, our oceans on both sides are both a positive and negative for terrain. Positive, it's easier to defend this country. Negative, it takes us a while to ship anything or get anything shipped to us. So we need to keep that in mind. Next up is labor. What is the size of your workforce? How skilled is your workforce? And how productive is your workforce? Keep productivity floating in the back of your head for when we start talking in a little bit about economic models. So size, are you a big country? Are you a small country? If you're Andorra, wedged between Spain and France, and you have like 70,000 people in your entire country, you are not going to be a manufacturing powerhouse. You're going to need to find something else to do with your land. On the other hand, if you're China, you have a massive number, you have billions of people living in your country, or over a billion at least. What are you going to do with them? How are you going to help them work and get them to contribute to your economy? In the case of China, the answer is you basically force them to do it. In the case of a country like India, the answer is you have a lot of poverty because you haven't really figured it out and capitalism isn't quite working for you. And then how productive is your workforce? And the big thing to think about with how productive is your workforce is what incentivizes them, what gets them to want to work. Why does this dude right here want to ride on his tractor? He probably wants to ride on his tractor because, let's say, for the sake of argument, he owns his own farm. He still needs to be able to pay his own bills. He wants to provide for his family. And I don't know, maybe he wants to buy a new TV or something. So that is incentivizing him to get up and be productive in the morning. On the other hand, if you're being told that you are going to, I don't know, the quarry to break rocks into gravel, despite the fact that you have the technology to crush up that rocks with large machines just to get you employed, you don't see as much value in your job, and the likelihood of you doing, a careful, dedicated job is less. So that really is a big deal. There is productivity. So next up is capital. Um, Capital is a very, very sort of vague is the wrong word. I don't want to besmirch the memory of Scotland's Adam Smith with this. But capital is basically everything that is tangible that goes in to production. So it's monies available to start and run a business. So this could be a business loan. This could be you having enough savings to start a business, with no debt, which is unlikely, but, good for you. But it is also the tools that you are going to use. It is the supplies. So it is paying for the tractor. It is paying for the gas in the tractor. It is paying for a mechanic to come out and make sure that, something isn't broken with your tractor and, replacing that sort of stuff. It's supplies. So it's the seed that you're going to lay down. It's the fertilizer you're going to use, yada, yada, yada. So all of the tangible stuff, all the things that you can touch that goes into running a business, all constitutes capital. And then lastly is the more sort of out there theoretical one, which is entrepreneurship, your ability to organize, run, monetize, and grow a business. So I could say right now, hey, I want to found a movie company. Do I know how to run a movie company? I certainly do not. Do I know how to organize it? No. Do I know how to make a lot of money off of that? No. Disney doesn't even. They just said that thing the other day where they want to, spend for people to spend $30 to watch Mulan on Amazon Plus, or Disney Plus, whatever it's called. Um, does that seem like a wise thing to do? If you're Disney, it does because they've got a lot of money. If I'm just coming up, that's probably not going to do so well for me. So entrepreneurship is the ideas and the learning that goes into factors of production and getting that stuff to work. Going to jump into the three big types of economy. Well, two big types and one little one. So we're going to start with the little one, which you've heard of before. You probably have some familiarity with what we call the traditional economy, but it doesn't really exist anymore. So I'm going to go through this one pretty quickly. As always, if you have questions, ask. And when we, do meetings of some sort, if you need clarification on this, that's fine. But this is more for background information. So the other two make more sense. So traditional economy is based on local tradition, which means that normally I would ask you that question. What does it apply about local practitioners? It implies that they're not really working with the rest of the world. Traditional economies tend to be more isolated and much more self-reliant as a result. So, for example, the one we're probably most familiar with out here is think of Native American economies before Manifest Destiny, when they're the only ones living out here. So, hunter-gatherer lifestyles certainly work as a traditional economy. Along with that, there's less education as we think of it. It's not to say that they're not educating the people that are there, but there's less of an education like you guys are getting right now. Because in a traditional economy, it is normally subsistence and hunter-gatherer stuff, and that takes up a lot of time. And so the time to, sit somebody down and teach them how to read or write or do complex mathematics just simply isn't there. Is if you guys think way back to what, probably like middle school, and you learned about those river valley civilizations way back when, one of the first things they did when they invented irrigation, they invented farming, was they started to develop writing styles, right? Because they had the time to do that, because the farming became less intensive. If you're hunter gathering or subsistence farming at best, you don't have the time to do that. So the products created in a traditional economy are based on items in the near vicinity. So, Icelandic blankets, there's a ton of sheep and wool in Iceland. They are going to spend their time, when they're not, husbanding those sheep and the little bit of farming or fishing you can do in Iceland, they're stuck inside a good chunk of the year because it is cold and snowy up there. So they knit blankets and then they sell them to tourists. I got one when my parents went to Iceland. It's a very nice blanket, highly recommended, very warm. Um, Pearl diving, think like Fiji or the southern parts of, New Guinea or Indonesia. Is These are places that are pretty off the beaten track, but the locals have a skill set that involves a lot of fishing and being able to dive deep in the water for long periods of time. There's a lot of pearls and clams around there. So they're going to pull those pearls out and then sell them to get whatever they can't find within their own area. That trade that they're going to do is going to be on a smaller scale. It's going to be, tribe to tribe, family to family, maybe small religious groups. And that is not to say like, the religion is a big deal of it. It's just, that community is based around religion. And as a result, the, high priest is probably the one in charge. The big thing with traditional economy, though, and why that's bolded and why you're writing this down right now already, is it's largely barter based. There is no usually money in a traditional economy. Instead, hey, I have wool, you have meat, I will give you some of my wool for some of your meat. That's it. And there's very little international trade. So it's not like somebody in Iceland with their, traditional knitting economy is going out and selling their Icelandic blankets to, I don't know, somebody in, let's pick somewhere off the beaten path here, Azerbaijan, in sort of Central Asia there. No way for those two countries to really get next to each other. So instead, what would happen is the goods from Iceland would move into a trade network. So they'd trade it to, some fisherman from Denmark who's out there getting resupplies. He's got a bunch of these blankets. He brings them back. He trades it in Denmark to some trader from Germany who knows somebody, and he trades it to them in Poland. Those people in Poland trade it to somebody in, Ukraine, who trades it to someone in Russia, who trades it to someone in Azerbaijan. It goes step by step by step. So at no point are the Azerbaijanis who end up with this blanket meeting the Icelandic people, because remember, these traditional economies are relatively remote. So small social groups, relatively small numbers, tradition for guidance, tend towards hunter gathering and small scale agriculture, and there aren't many of them. You've got the Inuit up north, in Alaska and largely Canada. You've got the San, who we talked about last time, who are the so-called Bushmen in Southwest Africa. And Aborigines in Australia have sort of begun to transition out of a traditional economy towards what we'll be talking about in a little bit. Um, some of them still practice traditional lifestyles, but more and more. So this picture on the left here is when Australia hosted the Olympics in 2000, and Aboriginal tribes were contracted by the Australian Olympic Committee to decorate the shoes for the athletes, and then they were like raffled off later on, and a good chunk of the profits went to, as they should, the Aborigines that lived there. So that's it for traditional economy. What I will ask you to do now is take a brief break and watch the Simpsons clip that I wish I could just show you here, but if I did that, YouTube wouldn't let me upload this wonderful video for you all to see. So, welcome back. Hooray. You watched that Simpsons clip. It's awesome. The Simpsons used to be great. On the right there is a statue of Adam Smith. I used to have a picture of myself standing in front of that statue in Edinburgh with Adam Smith, but when it was taken, my mom did not know how to use a cell phone camera and cut off basically all of Adam Smith from here on up. and also framed it so I was standing directly in front of his name, which meant there was a picture of me looking slightly damp in Scotland and like the lower 2/3 of this guy, which was not particularly helpful. So sorry, there's no picture of me there. I know you're heartbroken. All right, market economies are what we live in. Capitalism is a market economy. It is referred to as a classic economy. It is the economy that has been around the longest, and this is market. As capitalism comes along, 1700s as it finally gets articulated as to what capitalism is. So we're going to just go through is a market economy, and if you want to think of it as capitalism, that should work for you just fine. Long story short, as you saw with Homer having his brain explain how $20 is better than a peanut, money is exchanged for goods and services. So if the traditional economy was largely barter based, you need to think of market economy as money exchange for goods and services. That is the key to all of this. The market economy is a competitive economy, and there's a tendency towards better education, technology, and standard of living as a result. People make more money. They want their kids to do better than they did, have more opportunities, have a better skill set. They want to have newer, shinier things. They want to live in a nicer place. All of that is theoretically doable in a market economy through engaging with the market economy and working your way up. How do we produce stuff? There are two ways to do this. And again, I wish we were in person because this is usually a fun one to talk about. But your two options are an unregulated market economy or a regulated market economy. So in unregulated, you're going to have cheap goods. They are cheap because conditions are dangerous for the employees, and they work on a very fast turnaround, which means they're subject to economic bubbles. So let's do an example of this real quick. An unregulated economy. Think about one for a second while I take a quick drink here. Let's go with light up fidget spinners. You remember those? You were in what, like 7th or 8th grade when those came out? So fidget spinner, cheap, pretty easy to make. You need some ball bearings, you need some plastic, and in this case, you need some LED lights and maybe a battery. Dangerous for the employees, which means they want to pump out this product so quickly as this economic bubble expands, as the market wants more and more of these light up fidget spinners. They're not going to take a lot of time to set up that factory in a safe way. Instead, they're going to set it up, in a shed in the backyard. They're not going to do proper training with how to use, mold injectors to put the plastic together. The ball bearings are going to be lying around on the floor. People are going to fall. Employees are probably not going to be paid very well for this because everybody wants to get in on that money. So you're willing to take, a lower rate of pay so you can work more hours. It's kind of messed up, but that's how it works. And subject to economic bubbles, because who has a fidget spinner that lights up right now? You're watching this, maybe you're watching this in your room and you've got one lying around. I can see one sitting on the desk I'm working on right now, but that was a gift, which is the only reason I still have it. So that's an unregulated economy. The government is going to stay out of that, and they're basically going to be like, cool, cheap goods. If somebody gets hurt because the battery in that fidget spinner explodes, too bad for them. Somebody gets hurt at work, oh well, hire somebody else. So if you guys remember the 1870s, 80s, 90s last year with sort of the robber barons and the rise of labor unions, that was because the US was running an unregulated economy at the time. Also, those bubbles, those fidget spinner bubbles, they pop and then it goes away, and then all of the, jobs disappear, or most of the jobs disappear as well, and you got to go find somewhere else to work. Or you've got a regulated economy. Prices are going to go up because the quality of the goods is going to be better. Maybe because you want to sell to a more select clientele. Maybe because you are painting your toys with lead paint and, that's bad. So the prices are going to rise as the quality of the goods increases. The employees and the consumers are going to be protected. So the employees might be allowed to get into a union. Maybe they're allowed to have health insurance. They can negotiate with the ownership. Consumers are protected. We'll talk about the Consumer Safety Bureau later in the year because they run the best government Twitter account in the world. But there's an entire office of the United States federal government whose sole job it is to issue recalls on stuff that isn't safe. Think about earlier this summer when we had the E. coli onions out there. Is the FDA is there to make sure that that part of the economy is regulated, that the food is safe for people to eat. Um, Intervention by the government, so that's union and oversight. The government will step in. Basically, if you can't regulate yourself, we'll regulate it for you. So the best example of this, roughly in your lifetime, definitely in mine, is in the 80s. Tipper Gore, Al Gore's wife, decided there was too much swearing and lewd wordplay in hip hop music, so she helped create the parental advisory sticker, and was based the music industry was basically told, you adopt this or the government's going to regulate all of this. And so they're like, fine, we'll adopt it. So the video game industry, a couple years later, when the Mortal Kombat games came out, you could, rip somebody's spine out of their body or light them on fire or whatever, and all that 16-bit glory, said, well, we don't want the government to come after us. So we're going to put our, ETM, whatever ratings on these games so the government stays away from us. And the government said, hey, good job. You regulated that on your own. We don't have to worry about you anymore. So that's a regulated economy. It's safer. It might move a little bit more slowly, but the quality of the products and the health of both the employees of the companies and the consumers are protected. Market economies are subject to fluctuation. So boom, something gets really popular like the internet, and then everybody gets in on it, and then you have a bubble where too many people get in on it, and you realize, oh, we've got market saturation here. There's too much of whatever product. We've got too many fidget spinners, and then they go away. And also, you're subject to recessions where people spend too much money too quickly, and all of a sudden they realize, oh, no, we can't pay off all of our debts, and things go to hell in a handbasket. It happens in the US every 10 to 20 years. The one we're in right now, because the coronavirus is not anticipated. Other ones you can sort of see coming. There's a big one in the early 80s that Reagan is kind of lucky to get out of. You have the housing crisis from the Bush into the Obama administration. It happens quite a bit. But that is a market economy, is you run the risk because you are not just producing what is necessary, you're producing stuff that people just want. So when people stop wanting that brand of car, that brand of cereal, whatever, the market says, well, all right, we don't need that anymore. It can go away. And then poof, there goes your money. All right, more on the market economy here. Private ownership of the means of production is another big one. The government does not own things in a market economy for the most part. Sometimes they might own, a company here or there. It really kind of depends on the country. The more you drift towards socialism, not communism, two very different things here. You might have some government ownership of like power plants or whatever, but for the most part, private ownership of the means of production. Because the market economy thrives on this, and it's bold, you're writing it down, you knew this already, you're aware of capitalism, you're a senior, you probably have a job. Competition. Competition means that people are theoretically going to lower their prices to get more people to buy their stuff. Sometimes you run into issues like monopolies. Standard Oil with John Rockefeller, Bill Gates here jumping over a chair from a standing position because Bill Gates is an athlete above everything else. And then the government steps in and regulates that, because if you're a monopoly, that means, as you guys have experienced through playing the board game, I would assume, that you control everything. So Microsoft was the only one in the mid-90s that was running a functional operating system that was sold on computers, Windows. Rockefeller was basically the only one that was being able to dictate oil prices. As a result of that, Microsoft and Standard Oil could charge whatever they wanted for oil or an operating system on a computer. And the government said both times, that's not fair. You're not allowing competition in. You're basically buying up or killing off your competition. And that's doing a detriment to the United States. So when people tell you that America is a 100% market economy company and pure capitalist, no, we're not. The government's been regulating stuff since the jump, and especially since Teddy Roosevelt in the early 1900s, and to a good extent, William Howard Taft. But, sometimes monopolies are allowed to survive to a degree. Microsoft is still kind of a monopoly, but we're not going to get into that. Higher quality goods. There is a competition to buy stuff. You are going to want to buy higher quality goods if you can. Doesn't mean you always will, and sometimes it's a judgment call. So maybe you want, let's see, you want a new set of headphones. And a great set of headphones is going to run you $150, and a mediocre set of headphones is going to run you $30 because it's, wired instead of wireless. Well, if you just want that set of headphones for kicking around the house, and just so you don't have to listen to like your dog barking or your siblings on a Zoom call to school, you buy the cheap ones and they're fine. But if you want to like take those out and like, go work out with them or go on a hike or something, you want probably like, water resistant and wireless and all that. So you're going to pay for a higher quality good there. And if the expensive ones aren't better, nobody's going to buy them. That will come out very quickly. Is if all of a sudden you find out that, hey, those Beats headphones are in fact just Skullcandy headphones with a different logo on them, you're probably not going to buy Beats headphones as much anymore, and you're going to buy something else instead. Also, due to competition, less job security. Just because your company, like we talked about earlier, could get driven out of business. So competition can result in any and all of these three things. Higher quality goods, it can result in lower or higher prices. Sometimes you'll see what are called cartels, which are a bunch of groups, not selling drugs necessarily, that are all selling the same product. And they all sort of silently agree to not go that much higher in their price. They're all selling basically the same thing. So if everybody agrees that, hey, I'm more than happy to charge, $2.27 for gas, and that place across the street is also happy to charge $2.27, then neither of us are going to try to drop our prices and drive the other guy out of business. Instead, we'll keep our prices pretty much in lockstep, and we'll make sure that both of our companies survive. So competition does not always mean destroying your opponent. It could just mean, doing the right thing to stay in business. And, maybe you charge the same for gas, but, you offer a dollar discount on, a soda inside or something if you buy so much gas, whatever. The big thing with the market economy, and the reason why so many of them continue to exist throughout the world, whereas command economy, which we'll talk about next, does not, is because they are equipped to innovate. They respond quickly to change. So do you guys remember Toys to Life? There was like what were they called? Skylanders or whatever, where like you put them on a table like and it would light up, and then like you could play the game with them. Fidget spinners, face masks now is every t-shirt company ever, every sock company ever started producing face masks. Is they're able to change quickly because they're able to get an investment saying, hey, look, a bunch of people really, really like this thing that we're selling. You should invest in us, give us more money so we can produce more of it more quickly. And that is really going to help them out. So when a new idea comes along, a market economy is geared up, thanks to competition, to immediately switch gears. So if, tomorrow a new type of shoe is invented that holds your foot perfectly, and you just press a button like in Back to the Future instead of having to tie your laces, and people realize that they all want that, is our economy would be able to switch over to that very quickly. We're equipped to innovate. Hooray. Okay, on the other side, we have command economy. And this relies, big one here, on a central government to dictate the production and the goals. The people here are not saying, hey, we want fidget spinners, we want self-tying shoes. Instead, the government is saying, you will take these fidget spinners. So what happens in a command economy if the people don't want fidget spinners anymore? Well, it's down to the government to say, all right, we are no longer going to make them. So because of that, and because of all the red tape that's going to get involved, like we have down here, they're going to be very slow to change. So if this factory says, hey, we're making fidget spinners for you, the government says, great. And then on the other side, the store or the distribution point in communism is handing out fidget spinners, and the people are like, yeah, we don't want fidget spinners. We would, prefer shoes that don't fall apart. Then that's got to work its way all the way up from the store to the store manager to the branch manager to the head of that distribution center to the national center. The national center has to approve it. Then they have to tell the company to change over. The company has to put in requests. The government has to approve all of those requests. And by this time has happened, we're 2 years out. People still have crappy shoes, and that factory is still producing fidget spinners. Do we see how this is a problem? Command economies on paper work. which is why I put this fake book in here, is on paper, communism looks like it works, but it is so unwieldy, especially the bigger your country gets, that it never really functions. China calls itself a communist country. It's not. It's a dictatorship that uses the trappings of communism to keep people under control. Command economies are relatively new. We see them pop up with Marx and Engels in the 1840s. And the public, or in the case of China, the public, owns the means of production. So where, investors, stock owners, people in the company, Bill Gates, own, in a very literal sense, the company that they work for or own. In communism, the state, the country, owns all of it. And theoretically, that means everybody has access to everything. In practice, that means that you're probably not going to get what you want. Let's keep moving here. In a command economy, the jobs are provided by the government. So there's your upside. You're going to have very low unemployment, like it says down there. It's going to be near 0%, but there's going to be a lack of competition. You are not driven to do a better job. You're not driven to innovate and make a better fidget spinner machine, because what does it matter? You're getting paid the exact same amount as the guy next to you who's not putting anything in there. There's not really going to be a reward for you for innovating because there's no competition. So the production goes more slowly. They find something that works and they stick with it and they just grind it out rather than trying to do better or make better fidget spinners or anything else. Is we have checked our box that says, yes, we've made 1,000 fidget spinners for today. We are all going home. Also, because of this, lower quality goods. If there is not competition between fidget spinner A, which is, made out of plastic with burrs on it that can cut you, and rusty old ball bearings, and it barely works, and fidget spinner B, which lights up and has newly oiled ball bearings and is made out of smooth machined plastic, then they're going to go with whatever one's cheaper in a command economy, and it's not going to be of as high a quality. So again, everybody gets a job, everybody is going to get fed, but that's about as far as it goes. The quality of the stuff you're going to get is pretty negligible. So this is a picture here of a Russian grocery store, or maybe it's Belarus, in the 1980s. Is look at all of that quality. You have 2 chops of meat, and also we probably don't have enough for everybody because more of you wanted meat than we thought. We didn't plan for that 6 months ago, and now that it's 6 months later, you guys are toast and you're out of luck, and get your protein somewhere else. Eat a bug. So command economies are, again, on paper, they're very stable because everybody has a job, everybody has a role that they play, but do they work? And the answer is not really. It requires a principled government. The government actually needs to be looking out for the good of the people, but kind of as we discussed in the last chapter, is people, especially according to like Aristotle, tend to be pretty self-serving. And if the government is really not truly looking out for the people, you're going to get stuff like Stalin being so paranoid in the 1930s that he kills like almost all of his generals and almost loses World War II as a result because he's unprepared for the attack. Or you get Venezuela, where it's run by a former bus driver who has no idea what he's doing other than he became friends with the right guy 20 years ago. And you're so terrified of losing power that you run out of food, you run out of toilet paper, you run out of medicine, and you have to ask other countries like you to bail you out. And at the same time, any sort of protests in a command economy are seen as an attack on all of not only the economy but the country, and those protests get put down violently. People trying to leave Venezuela were being shot on bridges a couple of years ago. So is it stable? If it works, it's stable. If it doesn't work, there's no real way to fix it other than completely tearing it down, probably dynamiting the hole that it was built in and starting again. So this is the section that I was talking about, excuse me, that you're not going to have to do. A couple years ago, there was some talk that we were going to go through all of the history of governments. We're not going to do that. So if you want at a later date, I am happy to go through the entire history of government with you, but I assume most of you just want to get out of here, knock out your work, and be done with it. So instead, we are going to pick up here in our next video.